Hot hatchbacks are going through an incredible resurgence at the moment with, like back in the 1980s, manufacturers fighting each other for the title of the best performance hatch. With the war on performance and stats, the challenge for ever faster ring times has become stronger than ever, with power increases getting to 80 supercar levels. But as it turns out, it's not all just about pure performance. It's about giving a car a chassis that's exploitable and fun to drive, not just a big engine in a small car. And when it comes to that aspect, there's one car that moved the game forwards. Hot hatches tend to go down in history because of the way they make you feel when you drive them. That, or some contemporaries from around about the same time kind of just hang around because of scene tax, which artificially inflates their values, even though they're not as good. The 205 has lived through many incarnations. Its first big PR boost coming from Group B rallying, although, to be honest, the only thing that this actually shares in common with that weapon that Mr. Vatanen drove is probably the headlights, tail lights. That's probably about it, really. And then, of course, it lived through the 90s, where it was a favourite with all the Barry boys and suffered the same identity crisis as all 10-year-old hot hatchbacks do. But now, 30 years on, it's got legend status. And while there's a lot of articles around at the moment and things like that saying it costs thousands to get into a 205 GTi, at the moment, it's not really true. You can still pick them up for an absolute bargain price. They haven't quite gone the same way as the sort of BMW E30s and the Delta Integrales yet, because remember a few years ago they were so much cheaper, and I don't think it'll be long before these go into that area, and so now's actually a good time to pick one up. But the big question for a lot of people is which one to buy, 1.6 or 1.9. Well, to be honest, I've driven both, and really now I would buy purely on condition of the actual vehicle that you're looking at. The performance difference is quite interesting because on the 1.9s they've got that bit more torque, and you especially notice it at the higher end, like if you're on a track day or something like that, you really will notice it. Whereas the 1.6, it feels a lot revier and it feels sort of quicker, like when you're around town. I think partly due to the gearbox, it's got different ratios, so it actually feels a bit more nippy around town. An interesting thing with the power outputs is that on the 1.6s, they stopped making the 1.6 in 91 and they carried on making the 1.9, but in order to carry on making the 1.9 they had to put a catalytic converter on it. Now the 1.6 had 115 horsepower in later versions like this, whereas the 1.9 had 130, but with the addition of the catalytic converter that got added on, it strangled the power from 130 down to around about 120. So on later models, the power sort of difference between the two is even tighter. The 205 is very much an old school hot hatch. There's no traction control or ABS or anything like that. But to be honest, it doesn't really need anything like traction control to rein it in. It's not like modern hot hatches with all the techno wizardry, you know, Golfs with 300 horsepower. It's not about the power delivery, it's more about the way it makes you feel, and because it's so light it doesn't need to have loads of power. So yeah, I like the fact that it's old and it feels raw, and that's good. Although it still feels quite sharp, it does have a softness to it. You know, there's that little bit of body roll that you don't really get with the modern cars. A lot of the modern stuff, they feel really stiff and really planted when you push them, whereas the 205 doesn't. But actually, in a way, it feels good. It feels a little bit more free, like, you know, you can get a little bit more out of it, and the limits are kind of they feel more exploitable than they do in a modern hot hatch. In a modern hot hatch, it feels as if when you lose it, you know, you're really going to lose it. Whereas the 205, it sort of, you know, it feels like it's just going to slide around a little bit, and then you can just catch it and carry on, hopefully. Basically, what I'm trying to say is don't get any fantasies about buying a 205 GTi in standard form and being able to spank a modern hot hatch. It's quick, but it just won't really. But the 205 isn't about that. It feels light, it feels nimble in a way that nothing else can. And it's the sort of car that you just have to drive with a big stupid grin on your face. get this feeling through the 205 that it doesn't want to be driven slowly. The suspension doesn't quite work when you're driving, bumbling along, and you know, when you're in traffic, a lot of them don't like idling. This one's been set up properly, but a lot of them don't like idling and they cut out, and you just get that feeling. It's a bit like a boxer dog. It's born with ADHD, and it's only happy when you're really thrashing it and driving it like you stole it. This is probably why they were so popular with joyriders in the 90s. They don't exactly have the greatest level of security. I've got a mate that had a Bogo one, and someone actually stole it by putting their knee in the door and just peeling the top of the door open like a tin of pineapple. It's quite incredible. The sort of flimsiness that makes it so fun to drive is also the thing that reminds you that you're just in a little bit of metal with no airbags or crumple zones, and a seatbelt that's here purely for novelty value. The interior in this car, it is the most 80s thing ever created. It's brilliant. You've got like these bright red carpets, which nowadays you'd only get in sort of Exotica, and then you've got this red stripe that goes down the door. You can imagine someone just sat in here wearing red braces. And then the steering wheel, it's small and light, and it's before the sort of mid-90s when you got the great big cushioned steering wheels with the airbag systems in. There's something else in here that you can't quite get, and that's the smell of a classic car. They all have that certain sort of smell, and when you get in, as soon as you get into them, and it's all very unique to certain classic cars, and there's always that sort of slight sort of unburned petrol smell along with sort of old plastics. I'm not quite sure what it is, but there's a sort of almost like a mustiness from the seats and everything, and it all adds to the atmosphere. I love it. Something that's quite interesting to note is that the bodywork, it actually, on the 205, it cracks just here outside, more so on the sunroof models like this, because the bodywork is actually so flimsy it kind of tears itself apart. Despite the flimsiness, the 205 still feels strangely modern when you drive it. You get in a lot of other cars of this era and they feel, they feel a bit baggy and the steering's all loose and the controls can be heavy. But the 205 doesn't feel like that at all. It still feels quite sharp. The steering's great, the gearbox isn't notchy, it sort of goes through the gears well. And I think the only thing that you get in it is obviously it rattles, but so does a 5-year-old French car, so Also something quite modern. Look at the size of that sunroof. That is a massive sunroof. They only started becoming popular about 5 years ago. Oh, it's so easy to open. It's quite a satisfying sound, that. It's like sort of Star Trek. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Oh. Wait for the seal. Vacuum seal for freshness. Something else that makes the 205 feel strangely modern: rust, or rather the lack thereof. Many of its contemporaries tend to sort of just completely rust through. You don't see that many cars of this era around. But the 205 just doesn't, because they properly, I think it was zinc priming it straight from the factory. I had a Mark II Fiesta, and one day it blew away in a cloud of brown dust. True story. I think this resilience against rust on the 205 is actually something that's harmed its ability for the prices to stabilise. Because a lot of rivals like the Mark 1 Golfs and the Fiestas, because they just rusted through relatively quickly unless they were seriously well looked after, there weren't as many of them around, so prices on them are always going to go up, whereas when there's something that there's a lot of around, it's going to take a lot longer for the prices to stabilise, and they are getting that way now. The good thing with this car is that it's not the sort of classic that should be, polished up and just taken out on weekends to car shows with people that stick mirrors under their cars so that you can look and see that they've never bloody driven it. It's a car to enjoy, and that's the best thing with the 205. You can really take it out, you can really enjoy it. It's not an old British Leyland product that's going to fall apart all the time. Don't mothball it, drive it. That would be my advice. But when it's all said and done, there is one major issue when it comes to investing in a 205 GTi, and that is ultimately what it's worth becomes irrelevant, because once you've got one, you won't want to sell it.